So I think we're doing 5-minute talks in this session. There's a few more people coming in now. So I'm going to invite the speakers to come up and give their talks, set the timer for 5 minutes, and with a minute to go, I'll stand up. And we'll see, try and keep it to time. And then at the end, we'll do a panel Q&A. And I guess these lightning rounds are really important to, work on communication in a brief way because we're all time poor now to try and get that message across. So, good luck to the speakers. I'm sure you'll be great. It's going to be awesome. So I'll just get Sepp's ready. So our first speaker is Sepp Haukebo. Did I say that right? Haukebo? Haukebo from the Environmental Defence Fund. And Sepp is talking about SmartPass, an innovative approach to measure fishing effort using smart cameras and machine learning. So I'll pass you the clicker. And tell me when you'd like me to start. The floor is yours.
Start 2 minutes in. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to give a go at this. Wanted to recognize the traditional stewards of this land, the Wurundjeri, Wurrung, and the other peoples of the Eastern Kulin. Something I learned today is that those peoples have been around for 40,000 years, not 4,000, 40,000 years. And now I've got 4 minutes to go through this.
That's right. I gave you a bit of leeway.
All right. So I'm with Environmental Defense Fund. We're a nonprofit based in the U.S., but we work around the world in some of the biggest environmental issues facing mankind. So when we talk about estimating total recreational catch in fisheries, the challenge really is tied to the total catch, which comes from, and I borrowed this from our NOAA colleagues, the catch rate, which you usually derive from surveys, interviews, apps, and then also looking at the effort. And so one of the key questions is, how can we measure effort in a timely, accurate, and cost-efficient manner? And so really today we're going to be talking a lot about effort. So one of the solutions that we've worked on over the last 4 years is called SmartPass. And this is a solution really to enable managers and researchers through technology. So a key component of that is cameras situated at a coastal pass, a pinch point essentially, can also be at a boat ramp or a port. Second key component is a video review platform for human review, but also to assist in some AI training. And then the third piece that we've added on here is artificial intelligence to really assist with the review or at the far end of the spectrum, completely take over the review. And like I said, this is kind of a spectrum of solutions. So at the very simple end is just the video review, which requires entirely human review. That's what we kind of call the Chevy model. Then you've got your augmented review, which includes some algorithm assist, and this might be like your lane departure, right? It's kind of giving you a buzz, or it's automatically braking if you're about to hit a car. And then you've got the fully automated review, which provides effort counts, in our case, at the end of the day. And that's really the Tesla model. What would the Chevy version be in Australia? All right. Nice. All right. So where we are working right now is in Oregon in the United States. And there's a lot of examples from around the world of camera-based systems. But one of the best that we found is in Oregon. And you can see here these dots on the map. These are the main access points to the fishery. Actually, these are the only access points to the marine fishery. So there's about 11 in total. And we partnered with them, like I said, a few years ago to really bring some of their technologies into the 21st century. In 2007, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife set up cameras. Prior to that, they would actually send their staff to those ports or to those passes to count the number of vessels moving through there. Once they set that up, they could then cover all daylight hours. So this really is a census. It's not a sampling. They reduced their annual costs by an estimated 60%. And so that was, like I mentioned, a huge improvement. And then the next big improvement has come over the last few years. And that was a pilot really ran with ODFW, EDF, and a group called C-Vision AI. We helped develop a vessel detection algorithm, which was up to 95% accuracy, and then a classification algorithm, which can actually tell this is a recreational vessel, this is a sailboat, this is a paddleboard, This is a commercial vessel. The cameras, the nice thing is you don't have to use their cameras. Sea Vision AIs, they can use pretty much any kind of camera, but the ones they use run around 5,000 US. And then the review platform, which they use, is around 5,000 US as well. So this is a fairly simple solution. Like I said, we've seen this sort of approach in a lot of different places around the world. But one of the key questions I want to ask this group is where might this application be applicable in your regional fishery? And 5 minutes is pretty short, so if you want to see some additional resources and some examples of like the AI working, you can go to that website there, or you can email me. Since I've got a little bit of time and not totally out, you can see these bounding boxes right here on the left and on the right. The right side is where it looks across the channel. The left side is where it looks at actually the mouth where they cross into the fully marine area. And these bounding boxes are drawn by a human reviewer, but eventually once you get enough images in there, then the AI starts to take over. And the really cool thing is you can actually feed it boat images from online, and it can start to learn those different images from around the world. So we've got some test pilots that we've ran in the Gulf, Gulf of Mexico, we've ran in Oregon.
You're out of here.
And thank you to the partners.
Give a round of applause. Sorry, I had to say that. No, that was brilliant. Well done. Thank you, Sepp. Just get ready for our next speaker. All right, so our next speaker is Daniel Studt from the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Marine Fisheries Service. Daniel's talking about angler innovations, support Pacific rockfish population rebuilding, and increased fishing opportunities. Here it is. There you go. Daniel.
Thank you. All right, to save some time, I'm going to just skip ahead here. Thanks for the introduction. So I want to quickly highlight the importance of saltwater recreational fishing to our U.S. West Coast communities. There are a lot of anglers that take over 5 million fishing trips on average each year, and it contributes significantly to our coastal economies. And one of the primary targets of these recreational anglers fishing in our ocean environment is rockfish, bass. They're extremely accessible to the everyday fisherman. They're fun, easy to catch, and tasty. They're really sought after. Unfortunately, in the 1980s, 1990s, there was really heavy commercial and recreational fishing pressure, and it led to the overfishing of 10 of these rockfish stocks. These things were projected to take decades to recover, in one instance almost 100 years. And so it had significant impacts on our coastal economies. There were severe restrictions on bag limits, season lengths, and the implementation of large rockfish conservation areas, large closed areas. But the fishing community, they've really stepped up their efforts to rebuild these fish stocks, rebuild their fishing communities. NOAA hosted a national bycatch workshop pretty early on in the process, and ideas for minimizing discard mortality galvanized an effort to invent and promote the use of what we call descending devices. So you may have caught some of the barotrauma, the return them right workshops. These devices are used to release rockfish back down to depth to minimize discard mortality. This has allowed anglers to minimize their discard mortality while still targeting the co-mixed healthy stocks of rockfish. And they've been instrumental in educating each other on the use of these devices. They've hosted workshops and presentations on how to use them. They've posted content on social media. They've even created a YouTube rap video that you can find. They've created an educational campaign, the No Floater campaign. They even host a trade show each year to help fund the purchase and distribution of a number of these devices. So pretty huge effort on their part. They've also adopted new fishing techniques, in particular this long leader gear. It's allowed them to access these areas that were previously off limits because they could target healthier midwater rockfish stocks, which they hadn't really done before using these gear types, and it allowed them to avoid the constraining overfished demersal species. In addition, they've avoided hot spots outside of the already closed areas, so they've done so just through word of mouth and also working with our state partners to get out maps of these locations. And they've also participated in other ways that I wanted to quickly highlight. They've provided their vessels as research platforms, captain and crew of for-hire, guided fishing trips, collect carcasses from the fish that their passengers catch, and they'll ship it off to our labs. All that's used in our stock assessments now, going forward at least. They've participated in recovery planning surveys and really created an environment of increased collaboration and communication between all fisheries stakeholders, so the fishing community, fisheries scientists, fisheries managers. And it's been a huge success. Today, all of those but one of the rockfish are rebuilt, with one rebuilding well ahead of schedule. And so just wanted to share some key takeaways. While it may sound obvious, bring them into the conversation early and really value their input. Having them, the angling community, heavily involved in the process allowed them to communicate with one another the importance of these different techniques, and they heard it from themselves. It was sort of a peer pressure as opposed to the messages coming from the government, which might not be as trustful. So I think there's some benefit there in speeding up the rebuilding recovery timeline. And as part of that, from a government agency standpoint, it was really necessary for us to support these efforts through dedicated research, funding, and regulatory implementation, and really driving some of the communication and engagement aspects as well, which is part of our national policy on saltwater recreational fisheries. So with that, thank you very much, and appreciate it.
Brilliant. Well done, Danny. You still had 32 seconds left. Good job. Smashed
The question
through it.
we're all wondering is, did you voice the rap video?
Good question.
Yeah.
I should have mentioned as well, we're going to run through all the talks and then we'll do a panel Q&A session at the end. So save those questions that you think of and then we'll ask them to everyone. All right. And next speaker is Alex Vaishampayan from the University of Melbourne. Is that okay? Yeah, that was a good try. And Alex is talking about surveying anglers' values and support for activities to protect or restore freshwater ecosystems. Here's your clicker.
All right, kick me off. Hi, my name is Alex Vaishampayan. Pretty good. Yeah, pretty close, actually. I've heard much worse. And yeah, so it is another survey. But I think if any of you were in for the release of the National Recreational Fisheries Survey that just happened, they talked a lot about how anglers consider themselves to be strong environmental stewards. And so what I want to do is really examine some of the factors that may be impacting the types of activities that they're willing to support. So why do we care? Well, recreational anglers form an increasingly important component of our fisheries management systems. The word co-management has become such an important statement towards how we manage all of our fisheries over the last few decades. They're also active participants in our citizen science projects, and most importantly, there are voters in our democratic systems who are choosing the politicians that implement the kinds of recovery and management actions that we're undertaking here. Researchers and managers, we utilize our education campaigns in order to explain why we think certain management actions are appropriate and generate support for those kinds of activities. But the question is, does education actually influence angler support for actions? I think over the last few years, we've seen many instances where respectable institutions will come out with scientific information, but if it clashes with the inherent values of the people they're trying to communicate with, not only is that information disregarded, but the institution themselves are seen as less trustworthy. So it may be important to figure out what exactly the values of our fishers are in order to target appropriate messaging towards them. So our survey was generated with the help of the Australian Trout Foundation with two goals. First of all, to develop a quantitative understanding of the riparian knowledge and environmental values of the recreational anglers in Victoria, and examine if that knowledge or values impact the types of environmental conservation and restoration actions anglers support and what level of support that may be. So first part of that is looking at our environmental values. So we developed a modified version of the wildlife values orientations, statements that were developed at Colorado State University in the United States. And it scores respondents in kind of this matrix format on the strength of their mutualist or, well, the original one used domination, but I switched it to utilitarian worldviews. Probably an instance where there's a bit of a disconnect between managers and researchers and the general public. And then I gave you two examples here of what those statements might look like. So a utilitarian, a person who identifies as a strong utilitarian might react very positively to the statement that river and stream management should focus on maximizing human benefit. Whereas a person who identifies as more mutualist might have that fish and other aquatic animals have as much right to exist as humans. Now, it's important to note that these aren't necessarily on a binary scale. You can score strong in one area and strong in both areas, or strong in one and neutral in the other, or strong in one and negative on the other. And I think you can see how that would very differently influence the types of environmental actions that you might be willing to support. And the second we move into is how we measure our environmental knowledge of our participants. So a lot of surveys will use just general education level as kind of a proxy towards environmental knowledge. But you can see that a lawyer or a medical doctor may not know a whole lot about rivers and streams, even though they have a very high education level, versus someone who perhaps didn't even finish high school, but spends every day out on the rivers, would know a lot about them. And so we use two methods here to measure environmental knowledge. Firstly, we've developed a set of multiple choice questions that have right answers, and our survey participants will answer those and then be scored based on that. And then secondly, we've developed a really interesting question that asks them about the impact of various, the importance of various impacts on our riparian ecosystems, from strong positives to strong negatives. And then we ask a bunch of experts, so researchers and managers in the field, to give their responses. So we can compare the responses of each of our survey participants with kind of an expert response. Our survey is now open, and our distribution method is that we've approached a number of freshwater groups here in Victoria about distributing their surveys to their members. You can see a list of some of those there. I've also used the trade show last weekend to approach a number of angling clubs and trying to get them to send out their survey. And we're also utilizing several Facebook groups about fishing in certain locations, so we can try to broaden out the scope of our respondents. So I'd just like to thank these institutions for helping me out, and the survey is open.
Good job, well done. Great job, just on time, nailed it. Well done, Alex. All right, next. Perfect. There's your clicker. The next speaker is Lotte van den Heuvel from Uppsala University, and Lotte is speaking about integrating sense-of-place and angler stewardship studies, including local tourist.
Yeah.
You know when you're ready.
Great. Yeah, so my name is Lotte van den Heuvel. Very close again. And I'm going to be talking about, as you said, integrating sense of place in angler stewardship studies. So it's a nice bridge to the previous presentation. And the idea of my presentation is to just sort of make the case for why it is important to integrate sense of place and why we should do more of that in stewardship studies. So just very shortly, stewardship in recreational fisheries can be defined as a set of voluntary behaviors and internalized obligations. And I want to focus here on the word of care. So care is the affective component of stewardship, and it relates to the emotional connection that anglers might have to the fishing activity, to the place that they're fishing, or to a certain object. And so this relational understanding of care, understanding this relationship between the object of care and the person that is caring for that object, it might help explain why and how stewardship emerges in specific real-world context. And I would like to focus this specifically on the place, sense of place approach. So there's different ways to look at a relational understanding of care, but sense of place is a really important one. Just quickly going through sense of place theory. This is the general framework that is used to describe sense of place. It's a theory from environmental psychology, and it describes people's connections to a place in a number of different ways. And One of them is place dependence, a more instrumental way of describing place connections. And something that you might recognize from recreational fishery studies is statements like, for the fishing that I like to do, this place is the best. These are kind of statements that we use to measure place dependence. Then we have the affective component of sense of place, which is place identity, which is often measured through statements like, I feel a strong sense of belonging to this place. So it's more of an emotional connection to place. And then finally, we have place meanings. This is often not explicitly mentioned in recreational fishery studies, but it is included, as I will show you in the next slide. But place meanings are more descriptive descriptions of how people view a certain place. And for instance, people might describe a place as welcoming, or it has beautiful nature, or they feel at home here. And why this is important is because sense of place, these connections that people might feel, they feed into place-related behavior, among which also stewardship actions. So there is a lot of place-based work already being done in recreational fisheries. For instance, site choice models, they focus on specifically why are people going to specific places or specific sites, but they focus very much on these physical characteristics of a certain angling spot, fishing quality, catchability, accessibility, but they don't really look at these emotional connections that people might have to a place. They might go there because they have specific experiences, or they are familiar with this place. They like it because they have a good experience there, which is something that is often not included in these site choice models. Then there is destination image, satisfaction, and fishing quality, which are more descriptors of the perceptions and experiences that people have with certain fishing places, which relates also a bit more to these place meanings. This is a figure from one of my own studies where I looked at destination image, satisfaction, place attachment, centrality to life, and destination loyalty in a Swedish fishery. And we see a lot of connections here with how people view a specific place and the behavior that they're showing here, in this case, the willingness to return to this fishery. And then we have place attachment. There are a few studies within recreational fisheries research on place attachment, but it's very limited. It hasn't really been integrated fully into these kinds of studies. Now, there are a few challenges to integrating sense of place. There's a lot of issues around defining geographical boundaries. What is a place exactly? Is it a fishing site? Is it a whole fishery? How do we define this? Because these connections might be different. Then we need to account for different personal and contextual factors that feed into these connections. Which factors should we include? What should we look at? What defines these place connections?
30 seconds.
Yes. And then finally, we have the type of connectedness, the type of familiarity, the difference between locals and tourists and visitors. And how do we attract these less connected anglers to our surveys? We have this avidity bias here as well. But finally, to end off, there's a lot of opportunities here, because through better understanding of these reciprocal relationships between anglers and their fishing environment, we can create value-based stewardship promotion, targeting unique place connections and meanings. And that's it.
Well done. Spot on as well. All right. Hi, Angélica. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Just bring up your presentation. Okay, there's your clicker.
Yes, with this one. Right?
That one across, and that one you can go back if you need.
Okay, yeah.
So our next speaker is Angélica Quiñones-Peraza from the University de Yucatan. And Angélica is speaking about recreational and sport fishing in Yucatan, Mexico, social, technical, biological, and economic dimensions.
Thank you. Angélica Quiñones, gracias. Was closed. Okay, this work represents one of the first efforts in my country to describe the recreational fisheries in the state, in the Yucatan coast. Okay, in Mexico, we just have one official norm to regulate the recreational fisheries. This rule is focused in the Pacific side, in the Florida and Baja California Sur, with that context, doesn't contemplate the local context of the Gulf of Mexico, which is in Yucatan. We can see in the picture the existing diversity in the target species, in the modalities, and just to say some of the variety. So all of these species are related with the commercial fisheries too, which is artisanal in my zone. So for that reason, we want to describe all the dimensions as possible. This is one of our objectives, to describe different dimensions. We want to add or analyze the overlap between the recreational fishing season and the reproductive season of the commonly reported species. And we want to provide some recommendation for future management and monitoring of the activity in my region. Well, due to the lack of information, because we're just starting and the absence of our official registry of the number of recreational fisher in Yucatan, we use all the information resources as we can. First, we analyze a database of 10 years ago tournament announcement. We use recreational service, online and in situ service, that catch data from tournaments too. And well, we compare to the, well, as I mentioned, the reproductive season. We use the average maturity of the target species. The picture shows some of the catch from tournaments. And that picture, we can see one of the categories that we found, which is a higher catch. It's a box full of small fishes. The prize was given to the person who have the most quantity in kilos of fish, and this is another category. Okay, in the results, I'm going to focus in this interaction with artisanal fisheries in my country. So first, the most popular modality we found was the small boat, and these boats are rented to the artisanal fishery, and this represents the economic appeal for the coastal communities. We found too a spatial agglomeration in the Progreso zone, which is the closest coastal city to Mérida, a capital of Yucatan. And we found too like a higher, well, we identified the season of recreational fishing. We have a season from March to September. This season coincides with the spawning peak of 18 commercial fish species during in Yucatan. We found too, well, other important thing that I need to say, well, those are the most target species, the catches, and we can see we have the red grouper, and the red grouper represent, well, it's a great economic relevance for Yucatan Peninsula. How we can see in this picture, a high proportion of juvenile are being caught during this event. So what we want is to start to socialize and spread information. We think the tournaments are a good window opportunity to start to socialize the better fishing practices. So, well, I'll be happy to share our results with you if you want. This is my contact. Our paper was accepted yesterday, so if somebody wanted, you can write me. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Angélica. Yeah, 37 seconds to spare. Perfect. Almost time for a question, but we'll save it for the panel session and go on to our last speaker, and then we'll do questions. Okay, there's that one. Clicker is here for you, Jamie.
Just click this one?
This one just here to go that way, and that one to go back.
Perfect. Okay.
So our next speaker is Jamie Madden from Carleton University. Jamie's presentation is Cost of Being Choosy in Harvest, Short-Term Mortality Health of Northern Pike, Culled from Stringers. Tell me when you're ready.
Thank you, yeah. So yeah, I'm from Canada, and basically I'm just going to be doing kind of a small and simple study that I did last summer, and hopefully that can be interesting to the Australians as well. I don't have time to thank my co-authors, but there they are. So retention gear can be used by harvest anglers, also sometimes catch-release anglers, to keep their catch fresh. So I'm not sure if some or all of these are also used here, but we use live wells, keep nets, fish baskets, and stringers. So we have a bit of an issue in Ontario where there's no regulations on retention in fish. So during selective harvest and culling situations, fish can be released from retention And, it depends how they were retained, but any harmful effects that would have been, irrelevant had the fish been harvested, if they're released, they're now affecting the well-being of that fish. So we wanted to look at stringers particularly because they seem like the most invasive technique of retention. So we looked at how being culled from a stringer would affect the short-term mortality and blood physiology of one of our popular game fish, which is northern pike. So we took blood samples, we assessed their reflexes, and I built that little cage there to hold them for a couple days to see how they fared. So here are our treatments, 2 different kinds of stringers, metal and cord stringers, and then 2 different kinds of placements, so either through the operculum, through the gills, or pierced through the bottom lip of the fish. So straight into results, we can first look at the injuries we saw. So for the lip treatment, we really didn't see many injuries. Mostly it was just kind of expansion of the puncture hole, a bit of skin loss. But for the gill treatments, we saw, major immediate swelling of that lower jaw. And that was seen immediately, and it was also seen even 48 hours later, they were still swollen. Next, we could look at our blood readings. So in brown there, we have our glucose readings, and in green or blue, our lactate. So what we can see here is that all of our stringer treatments, those are the 4 in the middle, they all had significantly higher blood lactate readings than the control and the baseline, which are on the ends. So this is really just saying that the fish is really working hard on that stringer, trying to get off of it, really building up the lactate in a way that isn't really seen when kept in a live well, which is kind of like the gold standard of retention for culling at least. Next, we could look at the mortality, but mostly here the speed of mortality. So what's interesting on this graph here and what's shocking is that green line, right? So we have the percentage of individuals alive over different times. So we looked at them immediately after 8 hours, and then we checked them at 24 hours in the pen, and then again at 48 hours before we release them. So that green treatment, which is the cord stringer strung through their gills, so through the operculum, that had really immediate mortality. So most of these fish actually died just a couple hours after the treatment. So this was really harmful to the fish. Of course, the gills are a highly sensitive area, so this wasn't surprising. So lastly, we can look at the general kind of injuries and mortality is all kind of summarized in this table here. So in blue and those blue-green colors is the injury scores. So 1 would be no injury, 2 was slight, and 3 is moderate. And then you get into all those brown colors are different stages of mortality. So the worst being 7, dark brown would be died within earlier than 8 hours. So in general, we could see that 27% actually of stringer fish died throughout the entire treatment. And of the ones that didn't die, 68% showed injuries related to stringer use. So that's compared to a low mortality in our controls, which was about 7%. And of course, they didn't show any injuries from the live well. So all that's to say is that it matters how we retain our fish, especially if we want to later release them, or if we want, the option of culling. And for Ontario at least, fisheries managers may want to consider fish placed on stringers as just part of the catch limit and kind of just plain disallow them from being released, because the impact on the fishery is going to be a lot higher than what the kind of bag limit suggests it would be. So that's all. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jamie. Perfect. So that is all of our talks for this session. We're now going to do the panel Q&A session. So I might invite our speakers to come up the front and take a chair, take a seat. And someone might just have to have a normal chair. Awesome. Thanks, Lotte. And John's got the roving mic. Excellent. So 6 fantastic talks, all amazing timing, and I think you all did really well. We are ready for any questions from the audience, so happy to throw it open and see, does anyone have any questions for our wonderful speakers?
Hi, I'm Simon from Germany, and we are using cameras also to monitor the salmon trawling fishery in Germany. And so the question goes to you, Sepp. I wonder how accurate these AI algorithms are, considering like we really need to know what kind of fishing they do when we see a boat. So if they have, for example, downriggers on board, or like the specific trawling rods. So maybe you can say something about this.
Thanks, Simon, and good to. Is this working? Can you hear it okay? Okay, thanks, Simon. Yeah, we haven't used the algorithms to look at any other gear. It's only been based on the boat size and the boat type. But the accuracy, at least for the detection algorithm, whether or not there's a vessel moving through, I think that was around 96%. And then the accuracy of the identification algorithm was around 94%. And it was a pretty small sample size. But one of the key things that we've noticed working with ODFW is they weren't as interested in the Tesla version. Like we wanted to push the limits from the start. But because they already had a system that was working well, they wanted to take it incrementally. So they wanted to keep that human review, because there's so many aspects to that human review that they still incorporate. Is it a charter vessel? There's only about 15 charter vessels that go out of one of the ports, and the local reviewers, they know every one of those. So they're going to notice it a lot faster than an algorithm. The rule of thumb for machine learning is if a human can make the identification within a few seconds, then an algorithm should be. But we haven't got to that point yet.
Good question, detailed. More questions from the audience? I'm happy to have a go then. So I've got a question for Alex. I'm interested to know your survey, when you've approached some of those different recreational angler groups, what were the responses like, and were they different depending on those groups? Because I noticed there was some trout anglers, some native fish Australia, some native anglers and others. What did they say when you approached them about the survey, and were there differences there?
Yeah. I have to say no. There weren't really a whole lot of differences between the groups. I did have to modify my language a little bit, because the first time that I approached one of the groups, I said that we're targeting recreational fishers, and they all kind of looked at me, and I was like, well, targeting as participants, not targeting your fishery. But after that, no, it's all been really good responses. Everyone seems really eager to kind of have their voice heard, to take part of the survey. I think that the rec fishers themselves have, like the national survey just showed, they have a really strong sense of stewardship over the environment, and they are eager to kind of combat the idea that they only care about taking fish, and they don't really care about the broader ecosystem as a whole. So yeah, very, very eager to kind of get their voice out there, and should be fascinating results.
Yeah, that's great. So really good for their social license. They recognise that they can demonstrate anglers are great stewards.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Alex. Questions from the audience?
Can I ask one?
Yeah, sorry, and from the panel as well. Go ahead.
Angélica, I'm really curious in the Yucatan, kind of both sides. From the community side, does it seem like there's an interest in some aspects of recreational management, like a fishing license structure, or even maybe organizing of the voices and giving them more voice on some of the larger decision-making issues? So that's one question from the community side. And then does there seem to be some receptivity from the government? Is there some interest from the government as well, either at the state level or the national level, in looking at recreational management in the Yucatan?
Thank you for the question. From the community side, we are in our survey the preference for a management measure. Some people is interested. Some fishers are interested. Mostly are the frequent people. They are promoting the catch and release. That is not common in Yucatan, because mostly the fate of the catch is consumption. I'm going to fish because I want to eat fish. So mostly the people are proposing the catch and release. From the government side or the state side, we don't have too much interest because we have this of Mexican official norm. We have one. We don't need one, but well, yeah, we need it. They are not interested yet because we don't publish. They don't know yet that this is happening in Yucatan. Well, they have an idea, but they don't have the whole information, the impact that the recreational fisher have in, at least in the fish population in the Gulf of Mexico. So that's the reason and the relevance of to try to do the investigation in the field in the Gulf of Mexico.
Thank you, Angélica. Just sorry, one quick one on to that. Where did you publish your paper? Where's it been accepted?
Yeah, was accepted in the marine. I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, no,
It's all right. It'll come to you. It'll come.
Yeah. Let me remember.
It's all good. We'll go to the next question. We'll come back to you.
No. It's
No worries at all. No worries. Any other questions from the audience for the panel? Yeah.
Yeah, I have one for Jamie. Did you consider, or have you any idea how water temperature would affect your results? I think you did it in summer, but maybe how would it be at cooler water temperatures?
Yeah, so it was a factor in our study. Yeah, okay. It was a factor in our study. We did it in July, but there was actually kind of a wide range of temperature that we looked at anyway. It was just kind of how that month went, I guess. It was like very up and down. So I was able to factor that into my analysis, and we actually didn't see a difference in temperature influencing the mortality, which was surprising to me because I would think that, especially the pike being held in the pen itself, I thought that would kind of increase their mortality with the warmer waters, but we didn't see an effect, so yeah.
Great. Yeah. Question over here.
Thank you. A question for Alex. I don't know if I understood well your presentation, but I assume that based on the answers that you get from the survey, you are able to classify the fishers into those categories, or like the one had more like a mutualist, no, like behavior, and the other one was more like a utilitarian. So once you have defined those two categories, I'm wondering if it's really useful to predict future attitudes towards environment. Well, I don't know if you have tested that.
Yeah, there's a lot of really fascinating research going on right now, kind of around, especially these wildlife values that's happening. And just to give some background, one of them looks at kind of their longevity over a person's life. And what you find is that values themselves don't really change at all. As a matter of fact, they manifest themselves through generations. And so you'll get 4 or 5 generations that'll be showing the same trend in their values that'll be different from others. And so what we hope to do is, once we're able to kind of classify people into 2 groups, maybe we'll look at mutualist and utilitarian, although you can subdivide between, like a mutualist and a neutral utilitarian versus a mutualist and an anti-utilitarian will obviously be 2 different groups, but we haven't gotten that far yet. And then what you might be able to do, or at least what we're going to do now, is look at their current support for the types of management actions, as well as the types of actions that they take personally. And so we're not sure how much we'll be able to necessarily predict forward from that, but if values are kind of as static or as solidified as some of the literature suggests they may be, then they may actually be a really good predictor for the types of actions that they are willing to support. Because various different actions will fall more on the mutualist or more on the utilitarian side. Utilitarian people might support stocking more than habitat restoration, and that's something that you may be able to see going forward.
Thank you. First is regional studies in marine science.
Regional studies.
Sorry, I
Perfect.
was just nervous thinking that we
No,
still
no.
have the limit time to answer, but no.
Yeah.
I have a question. Do you identify like a factor like the fisher to choose one of the methods that you explained? I mean, if one method is expensive than other to don't hurt the fish or something like that?
Yeah, so you mean just like the cost of the different techniques? Is that what you mean? Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So that's one of the reasons that stringers are popular as opposed to live wells is that, you know, live wells come on boats and more expensive boats, but stringers are, I mean, one of them that we just made ourselves, like we just taped a spike to a cord. So it's super inexpensive, and that's why people do use them, unfortunately. So, like, we can't stop that from happening. Stringers are used, but basically what my study, what we wanted to show and what MNR, which is kind of the VFA of Ontario, they asked us to look at that to see kind of if they should stop people from releasing fish from stringers. So that's kind of why we looked at it, but because they are inexpensive and for that reason commonly used, yeah.
Fern, welcome.
Thanks so much. It's a question for Alex. And first of all, Alex, my deep apologies. I missed your talk because I got the timing wrong. But I'm going to catch up with you after. But it's a follow-up talk, follow-up question to the one you just had. So I'm interested in these typologies and values and identities that you've identified. And I'm really interested in, you started talking about how people might behave in the future. Are you also going to explore spillover behaviours and whether people's identity and their actions in one category might mean that it then spills over into perhaps more meaningful action for nature or things that they might do? I'm super interested in spillover and wondering if you've explored that. Thank you.
Gonna get your exercise up today, Jean?
Yeah, I'm also really interested in that. And the last question that we have in our survey is actually taken directly from another survey published by Victoria called the Victorians Value Nature Survey, where it asks all sorts of various questions around kind of environmental actions that have nothing to do with riparian ecosystems, just in general. And so I think that's probably as broad as we're getting, at least over the course of this survey. But it'll be really interesting to see how wreck fishers compare with the general population in terms of that survey, and also whether there's any kind of relationship between some of the actions that they support in the riparian sector versus more general environmental actions. Yeah, and then, you know, if that has anything to do with mutualist versus utilitarian identities as well. Really interesting. I'm working with Lily, so she pushed it pretty hard, yeah.
I have a question for you. I don't know your name, but with the thing about the cameras, I used to work in the Galapagos Island, and at some point they were considering options like about putting cameras on the docks or in the boats, and there was a big issue with the fishermen about privacy and about confidentiality, and yeah, is there any issue about that with you?
Yeah, great question. So in the case of our pilot in Oregon, the state agency has actually been running that system for almost 15 years now. But we did a news release after our second year of the pilot saying, you know, look at this great new technology. And there was some positive response, but there was definitely some negative response saying, you shouldn't be allowed to videotape public spaces. And we did some outreach with the state to those folks to say, you know, this program has been in place for 15 years. This is just adding an additional step. But absolutely, that's a key piece of it, is building trust with that community, letting them know that, you know, there is protection of the videos. The videos are encrypted. The videos are only allowed to the select folks that access it through the state agency. And before we started any of it, we had to make sure we looked through, state and federal laws to make sure that it was legal but also ethical, right? You guys use social license a lot here, and I think nonprofits also have they have to answer to social license. Just because we're working in the name of conservation doesn't necessarily mean you can do whatever. So it's a key piece, absolutely. There's no private information that's used. We don't use the boat numbers. They're not identifying this boat was out for this long and therefore may have caught this much fish. That's all randomized in the system essentially.
But I guess if you're working in a small town, for example, everyone knows everyone. So
Yeah, absolutely. I can't answer for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Those are some relationships that they've had to build over the years. But the neat thing is that because most of those are small towns and there's only one pass and there's only a couple boat ramps to get there, the state agents that are out there giving the interviews, that's the second part of the data collection, right? The cameras identify effort, but you have to figure out what's your catch per unit effort. And so to do that, they have dockside intercepts asking those questions. How many fish, how many anglers, how many fish per angler. And most of the avid anglers get to know those dockside agents fairly well. And that's a key way that they end up building trust. The last piece I'll add is the salmon fishery is so important culturally in that part of the world that the anglers and a lot of politicians have hoped to be able to manage it down to the daily level. So at the end of each day, they can identify, okay, we can keep this fishery open for 1 or 2 more days. And that's maybe the most extreme example I've heard, except for Western Australia, where they have a 1-hour abalone fishery. And it happens every couple weeks, and they estimate the entire effort, which is just madness that they can manage it that quickly.
That's fine scale.
But when you start to provide those trade-offs and say, this is the reason this is how the data is used, is because it actually gives you additional access and it's better for the long-term management of the resource. That's a key piece.
I have a question for Daniel. It sounded like your anglers really got on board rebuilding the rockfish fisheries. Was there a particular strategy that you think really got the anglers on board in that process?
I think finding those key organizations, club members, community leaders, we heard in Sasha's talk, really bridging that gap of the river from one side to the other. And I think we had to, reach out to the leaders of those organizations who are influential in their own communities, share our information with them, and let them take that back to the people, their fishing communities, people that they're working with and leading. And I think that was really beneficial, making those relationships and making sure that they're aware of, what was happening at each step of the process, involving them in every conversation that was there. And we did a lot of citizen science initiatives, getting anglers out on the fishing vessels to release rockfish. They see how the process worked, see what science was going into the depth-dependent discard mortality rates that are now being used, and then also, getting these values approved in the fisheries management process. It took a little while. It was a long process, but having that shown to them and how it would benefit them, I think, was really beneficial. Just more time on the water, more areas to fish, really let them recognize the value of their contributions.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I follow up to that one. So you kind of, there was that campaign with the no floaters. Did you find that maybe that was something that really stood out to a lot of people? Is I caught this rockfish and I tried to put it back and it just floated on the surface, and that's when I realized that this is really a problem. Because barometric pressure, that can be kind of a hard concept to get through to a lot of people. And so did you find that them being able to see, does it happen often enough that it was something that was like, oh yeah, I saw that, and that's when I realized that this was a problem and we should do something about it?
Yeah, I think it is a more visual problem, exactly like you were saying. You're releasing fish and they're just floating on the surface. You have predation, you have sea lions that come over and want to want to predate on these fish that are just floating. So that was also another incentive for them to use descending devices, get the rockfish down, so you're not having sea lions and seagulls hanging around the vessel trying to get your fish while you're reeling it in. But yeah, I think that visual aspect of just seeing fish wasted essentially was really a key motivator in getting them to do something.
A question for Lotte. So we know that avid anglers can be more likely to be stewards, angler stewards. Do you think there's an interaction between angler avidity and sense of place?
It really depends, because I think you can see that also in a like people can be specialized towards a place as well as being, like you can be an avid angler in one way but not in another way. So it really depends on how you define that and whether you define that to place or not. So, for instance, place attachment is something that builds over time. So it's likely that anglers that are more avid, that spend more time fishing, will also build a stronger connection to the place that they're fishing. And in some cases, people might choose to specifically focus on a fishery that is close to home, so they have also that home connection to that fishery. Other people might be more moving around, have the means to go on angling trips in a wider area. So there's a lot of different factors that factor into this, and this is also what makes it so complicated to study this. And this is also why I think it's not really been followed up on so much, because how do you define a local angler? How do you define a tourist angler? And how do you describe these different relationships and experiences that people have with a specific place? In some cases, it might also not be limited to just fishing. They might have other experiences in a certain area that tie that area to them. So there are so many factors that factor into this. On top of the fact that there are so many other aspects to angler stewardship, as Alex also mentioned, there are so many different components of that it's really difficult to isolate specifically the effect of place connections. So yeah, there's a lot of
keeps you interested, multidimensional,
yeah.
Complicated.
Yeah.
Got time for a couple more, and yeah, go
what
ahead. What
about conflicts? Do you find some conflicts between? I know you have problem between the tourist or the local, but sometimes, at least in Mexico, happen a lot. Like, I have the sense of the place. I don't want that you come to fish here. Yeah. Did you find something like that?
So in my empirical studies, I'm at this point conducting a survey on the island of Gotland, where I live, where we're looking specifically into local anglers and tourist anglers. And there's definitely this issue of people that live in a certain place where residents have this idea that this is my fishing spot, this is where I want to fish, and I don't want to have to stand in line after all these tourists that are just coming here and taking my fish, so to say. So I mean, there's definitely this component there as well. So yeah, that's not something specifically conflict. It's not something that we're looking into in this study, but anecdotally, that is definitely something that we've seen happening. So yeah.
Any other questions from the audience or the panel? No? Well, we might wrap it up there. Can we give another round of applause for our fantastic speakers? And we might finish it up. So we've got 5 minutes spare ahead of the other ones. Yeah, great session, good discussions. Well done to all the speakers. And yeah, see you at the gala dinner later on. Well done, everyone. Thanks to our audience too.